Welcome to the first module on using design principles to help create your tutorials. This is Hannah, and I'll be guiding you through this section. The design process involves thinking about your tutorial in several big picture ways. The guiding question through all of the design modules will be, what do you want your learners to know at the end of your tutorial? And then we will work backwards from there. The first step in the design process is to consider if a tutorial is even the right tool for the job. One way to answer this question is to think about what instructional designers Patricia Smith and Tillman Regan describe as the type of knowledge you are trying to teach. We will consider 7 knowledge types in this section. We will examine how well each of those knowledge types works for communicating the knowledge in tutorials, and along the way, we'll look at some example tutorials that use the different types of knowledge. Throughout this discussion, keep in mind some ideas for your own tutorial. Think about what the topic of your tutorial is and what kind of knowledge you will be communicating. The first type of knowledge I'll talk about is declarative knowledge. Declarative knowledge involves learning baseline facts and memorizing terminology. Declarative knowledge is very important when you are orienting learners to a new library or to new ways of exploring a discipline. Here's a basic example of teaching declarative knowledge. This tutorial from Oregon State University covers what call numbers are and how to use them. Without an understanding of some of the terminology we use in libraries, it can be difficult for learners to use our resources. Tutorials are very appropriate vehicles for helping learners to understand topics that involve declarative knowledge, those memorization and vocabulary elements. The ability for students to access declarative knowledge-based information whenever they need a refresher is especially helpful and one good reason to create tutorials for this knowledge type. Conceptual knowledge is used when we want learners to be able to categorize information and then apply that knowledge to new situations. Conceptual knowledge builds on declarative knowledge because some understanding of terminology is needed, but then learners need to be able to use the terminology attached to specific categories to make decisions and to try out that ability to make distinctions in a new context. In libraries, one classic example of conceptual knowledge is providing instruction on the difference between primary and secondary sources, as in this tutorial from King's College. Tutorials are appropriate vehicles for helping learners to learn about topics that involve conceptual knowledge elements. The types of visuals that can be used in tutorials, the ability to show several examples to help students begin to understand the framework behind different categories, makes tutorials appropriate for helping learners gain conceptual knowledge. Procedural knowledge is used when we want learners to be able to know how to do things in a particular order, and then hopefully transfer that knowledge to a new situation. Again, procedural knowledge builds on declarative knowledge because some understanding of terminology is needed, but then learners need to be able to use the terminology to navigate through a task or interface. In libraries, we teach a lot of procedural knowledge-based skills. For example, when we talk about how to start a search with broad keywords and then use facets to narrow down the search results list. Or when we teach learners how to use a particular tool like Zotero or a particular database. This tutorial at the University of Washington demonstrates how to go through the process of finding guides on the library website that provide more suggestions of places to search. Tutorials are appropriate for helping learners to learn about topics that involve procedural knowledge elements. However, practicing the procedure usually involves leaving the tutorial or having the tutorial pulled up beside another browser screen in order to try out the process in the tool itself. For example, when doing a database search. This is the benefit of using a tutorial creation tool like Guide on the Side, because the ability to practice with help text on the side is embedded into the tutorial itself. The final 4 knowledge types are all much lower in their level of appropriateness for tutorials. While there may be potential tutorial options for topics that match up with these types of knowledge in some circumstances, the likelihood of learners successfully learning what you hope they will learn via tutorial is lower for all of these knowledge types. This is due to either the high level of interactivity on the part of the instructor or the sustained reflection that's needed in order to achieve the learning associated with these knowledge types. I will just briefly define each of the knowledge types just in case a tutorial topic you are considering falls into one of these areas. Problem-solving knowledge builds on declarative and often procedural knowledge to solve problems in a particular discipline or subject area. It is possible to create a tutorial covering topics in this area, but the tutorial would need to have a fairly sophisticated interactivity option with highly relevant examples to the specific disciplinary area. The cognitive strategies type is about learning to learn and covers ideas related to reflection and metacognition. While self-reflection prompts can be included in tutorials, explicitly teaching learners to use these strategies typically involves more individualized feedback than most tutorials provide. Attitude learning involves learning how to shift internal attitudes like becoming less anxious or thinking like a researcher. The type of reflection and modeling by the instructor that is required to learn about topics within this knowledge type are very difficult to teach in tutorials that don't involve individualized feedback and direct instructor interactions. Psychomotor skills have a physical element to them. Computer games can teach these kinds of skills, and there might be a few library situations where a tutorial could be used to teach topics in this knowledge type, but the set of examples are pretty limited. So to check your understanding of these knowledge types, think about what type of knowledge this example tutorial covers, and then answer the self-check question on the following slide. This first tutorial example is a test tutorial I created in SurveyMonkey, the same platform that you can use to create your tutorial project in for this course. So what do I want students to know at the end of this tutorial? I want them to understand the range of sources that they can expect to find using our discovery tool. I want them to know how to refine and narrow a search using the facets in our discovery tool. And I also want them to know how to get to the full text of an article if appropriate. The second self-check example is from UCLA Library's Citing Sources tutorial. I'll just emphasize two tabs in this tutorial for right now. What students should know at the end of this tutorial is when they should cite, why they should cite, and on this third tab here, how to actually read citations. So on the next screen, choose what type of knowledge you think this tutorial covers. While each of those self-check examples arguably could be covering more than one type of knowledge, the OneSearch example was mostly covering procedural knowledge, while the UCLA example was mostly covering declarative knowledge. Take a minute to stop and think about your potential tutorial topic. What kind of knowledge does it match up with? How appropriate does this topic seem for a tutorial? Feel free to pause this presentation while you reflect. For part of your assignment this week, go to the discussion forums to complete the tasks based on this module. Find a pre-existing tutorial, one that you like from either your library, a friend's library, or from the Primo database. See if you can determine what kind of knowledge that tutorial covers. On the forum, post the tutorial name and URL, the main topic covered by that tutorial, and your description of the knowledge type covered. This is the end of Design Part 1 for Week 1. Please continue with Design Part 2, which will discuss how to design tutorials using specific instructional strategies that are appropriate for tutorials.